Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and there's a video that I want to record today, but I'm struggling. I've attempted recording it a couple of times already and just can't get my thoughts in order. I want to talk about what happens when someone believes that they are a Gardnerian initiate and then finds out that that's not the case. Because that's a very hard thing to learn. It's a very difficult conversation to have. It's a conversation that Gardnerians often end up having with people because there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what Gardnerian Wicca is, and there are a lot of really sincere people who have been uh, intentionally or otherwise misled into thinking that what they do is Gardnerian. It's also a conversation that needs to be navigated with a great deal of compassion and grace. And I think that it's often not navigated with compassion and grace. But in order to talk about that, we first have to get really clear about what Gardnerian Wicca is, what it is not, and why that matters. Gardnerian Wicca is an initiatory mystery cult, and it is defined in part by a series of initiations that convey a magical lineage. So I was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone in a direct chain going straight back to Gerald Gardner, who was the man who introduced Wicca to the world in the 1950s. And there are other components of Wicca besides the lineage, but the lineage is load bearing. The lineage is an essential part of it. Partly that's because Wicca, Gardnerian Wicca, operates on a model of coven based teaching, training, ritual practice. The tradition is passed in a coven setting from initiator to initiate. There are things that you learn through your lineage that you can't learn otherwise. So partly it's just a matter of like things that are learned and done happen in that lineage. Partly it's a matter of I want to be really careful about my words here. Um, Partly it's a matter of belonging to a magical current, I think is perhaps the easiest way. And I don't love that phrase. Um, the actual word, the denotatively correct word that I want to use is it's a matter of having the right to perform the rituals. But that's a loaded word, and I don't want to use it and have people think that I mean something that I don't mean. What I mean is that in Gardnerian Wicca, there are rituals we perform, there are energies we use, there are spirits we work with that need to recognize you as having a status as a Gardnerian initiate, or they won't answer to you. This is not just a Gardnerian thing, this is a thing in any sort of religion or spiritual community where there is something like a priesthood or where there is a particular status that you need to have in order to do certain things. I am not capable of performing a Catholic Mass, right? You could write down the script. I could stand at the front of a church and say the words. I can't perform a Catholic Mass because I am not a Catholic priest. I don't have the right to do it. And even if I said all the words and did all the things, it still wouldn't count as a Catholic Mass, right? I do not have the ability to turn a cup of wine into the blood of Christ. I just don't. And there's a similar thing in Gardnerian Wicca, right? There are things in our rituals that you need to have the right to do. And the right to do those things comes from having been introduced to our gods, introduced to our spirits, introduced to the community of the Wicca in an initiatory ritual context by someone else who has the right to do it, right? You show up to a party all by yourself and you say, hey, I'm here to be at the party. If no one knows you, you're going to get the door closed in your face. You show up to a party with your friend Greg, who knows the person whose house it is, and Greg says, hey, this is Jack, he's cool. Then you can come in, and then you can join the party. And it's a similar thing ritually, where the ability, not just like whether you should be allowed to, but just the actual ability to perform Gardnerian rituals is contingent upon you having been introduced to our gods and spirits in a ritual context, following the correct ritual procedure, and by someone who was able to introduce you, right? If you show up to the party with your friend Greg, who knows the person whose party it is, that gets you in the door. If you show up to a party with your Greg Anthony, who also doesn't know anyone at the party, that doesn't help you. So if you go through something that looks like an initiatory ritual, but the person who performs it doesn't have the authority to perform it, that ritual doesn't get you in the door. And this is a very difficult thing to talk about. It's a very difficult thing to explain because it feels exclusionary. And it is exclusionary, right? We're saying you can't sit with us. But it's not done out of a sense of elitism. It's not done out of a sense of like, we think we're better than you or anything like that. It's just that, like, dude, this is a party at someone's house and you can't show up if you don't know them. And the someone here is the gods and spirits of the Gardnerian tradition, right? Like, it's not that you're unwelcome, it's that you are unknown and you aren't a part of this thing. And it's so hard. It's so hard to explain this and to have this conversation because it makes people feel rejected. And it makes people feel like they're being told they're not good enough. And that's not it. That's really and truly, that's not it at all. It's not a commentary about whether someone is good enough. It's a commentary about whether they have the ability to participate in Gardnerian ritual. If someone shows up to a hospital and says, hi, I'm here to perform a heart transplant, you want that person to be a heart surgeon. You want that person to have gone to medical school and received the training and to have the credentials that enable them to perform that transplant. And if they haven't gone to medical school and received those credentials, that's not a commentary on their worthiness as a person. It's not a commentary on their intelligence. It's not a commentary on their ability, because it may be the case that if they went to medical school, they would make an excellent heart surgeon. But you can't be an open heart surgeon if you haven't gone to medical school. And I mean, in the case of a surgeon, like, people will die. In the case of Wicca, no one's going to die, but there's still a sense of like, so I'm trying so hard to find words for this that aren't going to make people feel rejected, because that's not what it's about. Not about making someone feel rejected. But this is a thing that has I come back again to the example of the Catholic priest. Like, I'm not able to perform a Catholic mass. I'm just not. And someone who isn't a Gardnerian initiate, doesn't have a Gardnerian lineage, isn't able to perform Gardnerian Wiccan rituals in the exact same way, right? People on the internet, spend less time on the internet now, so I don't know if this discourse is still in practice, but 5 or 10 years ago, there was a big discourse all over the internet about like open versus closed religions or closed practices. A lot of the time, that conversation happened in the context of sort of questions about race and ethnicity and colonialism and the sort of exploitation that is often inherent in power dynamics of a powerful group trying to extract religious or spiritual practices from an oppressed group. But setting aside those very complicated power dynamics, an open practice is something that anyone can do. A closed practice is something with a barrier to entry of some kind. And that barrier might be cultural, it might be ethnic, it might be initiatory. And there's a similar, like Gardnerian Wicca is a closed practice. It is a closed practice that it is possible to join if you find a coven and go through the initiatory rites with a legitimate coven. But it is a closed practice, and unless you have gone through those initiatory rites with a legitimate coven, it's closed to you. That door is closed. And again, the analogy is imperfect because in one case, there's a whole history of colonial violence that is part of it. But just as an example, smudging is a very specific ritual that is performed in a very specific context by people who have the power to do so. I can't smudge. It's not just that I shouldn't, it's not just that it would be racist and appropriative and bad of me to try. I literally can't because I do not have the authority. I do not have the right. I don't have the credentials that get me in that door. It's more complicated in the smudging case because, again, there's a history of colonial violence, and I'm very waspy. But there is an analogy to be made with Gardnerian Wicca, where that's a set of rituals that can only be performed by people who are consecrated members of the priesthood of Gardnerian Wicca. And if you haven't been initiated into the priesthood by someone who had the ability and the authority to do so, it's not just that, like, you're not allowed to and we don't want you in our club because you're not cool. It's that you literally can't do Gardnerian Wicca. So all of that's a very long-winded wind-up to the question of what happens when you have someone who thinks that they're Gardnerian but who isn't. And this situation arises often, much more often than I wish it did. A lot of the time, the people who are making this claim are sincere. So a lot of the time, what happens is that someone is looking for Wicca, they find a coven that claims to be Gardnerian, they don't know any better, they join that coven, they think of themselves as Gardnerian, and then at some point down the line, they try to interact with the broader Gardnerian community, and people in the Gardnerian community are like, hey, has anyone ever heard of these people? And we're all like, no. And then it comes out that their initiation, or whatever they thought their initiation was not a real Gardnerian initiation, that they don't have lineage, that whatever they're doing doesn't look like what we do, and that they have been deceived about being Gardnerian. In some cases, it's a long time before this is discovered. So in some cases, you have like a fraudnerian coven that sets up, they initiate someone, that person goes and starts their own coven, and you get like 2 or 3 generations of covens claiming to be Gardnerian that actually aren't. And then that just becomes a horrible, messy, terrible, tangled thing to try to unravel. And it's really hard. It's hard because people are sincere about their spirituality. And in some cases, they have dedicated decades of their life to practicing this thing that they thought was Gardnerian Wicca. And to find out after the fact that it's not Gardnerian Wicca, they don't have Gardnerian lineage, that the rituals they're performing often look nothing like the rituals that we do in Gardnerian Wicca. To be told that it was all a lie is really hard for people. It's really jarring, and it really takes the rug out from under you. And because of that, people often get very defensive. People often get their hackles up and they say, you don't have a right to tell me that I'm not Gardnerian, or, you're just being elitists, you're just being snobs, like you just don't want people to play in your sandbox. And I know it feels like that. I know it feels like that, but I promise you that's not what it's about. It's not that we think we're too cool for you. It's really, really not. It's that you're doing something that's not Gardnerian Wicca. And we're trying to draw that line around the thing that is Gardnerian Wicca, partly for clarity, but partly because this tradition is important to us. It's sacred to us. And people outside of it don't have the ability to do it. In the case of the sort of patient zero of Fraudnerian claims, sometimes it's people who intentionally set out to lie, right? Sometimes it's people who say, I'm going to start a coven and just pretend that it's Gardnerian. That happens. In other times, it's people who genuinely don't understand what Gardnerian Wicca is. And, they pick rituals off the internet or out of books, and they think, oh, I'll just do these rituals, maybe tweak them a little bit, and I can call it Gardnerian. And it's just not how it works, right? Any more than, again, I could pick up the script of a Catholic Mass, go break into a church, and say all the words and pour wine into a cup. It wouldn't be a Catholic Mass. It's a hard conversation. It's a really hard conversation to have. One thing that I think often gets left out of the conversation is that just because your initiation or your practice wasn't Gardnerian, that does not mean that it was a waste. That does not mean that it was all fake. That does not mean that it was meaningless, right? You may still have had deeply important transformative experiences. You may still have done powerful magic. You may still have, worked the wheel of the year. You may have done all of that in a way that was important and meaningful to you. And it can be an important and meaningful part of your spirituality without having been Gardnerian Wicca. And it doesn't have to have been Gardnerian in order to be meaningful. But if it wasn't Gardnerian, it wasn't Gardnerian. And trying to defend the legitimacy of it by sort of digging in your heels and insisting, no, this is Gardnerian, and you're all just being snobs, other Gardnerians who don't like the fact that I don't have a lineage. It cheapens what you're doing. It cheapens what you're doing. It tarnishes it by making it dishonest. It is okay to have had powerful experiences that you thought were Gardnerian, that it turns out were something else. Those experiences remain powerful. But insisting that they are something they're not cheapens them, in my opinion. And also, like, when you find out that you thought you had been practicing Gardnerian Wicca and it turns out you aren't, it's okay to have complicated emotions about that. It's okay to feel betrayed or lied to or hurt. It's okay to feel defensive, honestly. Like, that's a normal human reaction to have. Spirituality is such an intimate thing, and when you find out that something you've thought about your spirituality, again, in some cases for decades, is not the case, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to have a hard time with that. but please don't kill the messenger. Like, no, I promise you, no one is delighting in telling you that your practice isn't actually Gardnerian. It's not fun for anyone on our end, especially because people get furious and blow up and scream at us. We're doing it because we want you to know the truth. We're also doing it because we don't want you to unintentionally spread misinformation to other people, and then we have to have the conversation again with them. And we're doing it to protect this thing that is sacred, that is passed through an initiatory lineage, from imitation, from fraud. We're not doing it to be assholes. We're not doing it because we delight in telling people that their magic is fake. That's not it. Who knows? There are probably some assholes out there, but like, by and large, when you have this conversation with someone, they don't want to be having the conversation any more than you do. Really. But the goal is for you to understand what Wicca is, what Gardnerian Wicca is, what it is not, and why it matters that you not make false claims. And it is okay not to have known, right? It's okay that you were misled about what constitutes being a Gardnerian, but now you know. There was a Fraudnerian coven. I think there were two, actually. I think they had someone who hived off from them. There was a Fraudnerian coven in Utah in the 90s. And I don't know much about the details of what happened there, because it was in the 90s and it blew up in everyone's faces, which Fraudnerian covens often do. And no one currently is claiming, from that coven to be practicing Gardnerian Wicca or to be teaching Gardnerian Wicca, and it seems kind of best to just let sleeping dogs lie. Like, there was a whole bunch of shit that happened in the 90s. It all seems to be over now. But I had someone reach out to me pretty shortly after I moved to Utah and say, like, hey, I'm just looking for clarity about this situation. There was this group in the 90s that I was a part of, and like, they said they were Gardnerian, and I still don't know if they were. And we had to go through this process of like tracking down the claim that they had to initiation and talking to people in the Gardnerian community, and no one had ever heard of these people, and there were a handful of red flags that indicated they probably weren't Gardnerian. And having that conversation of like, yeah, no, these people were not Gard. But your having been in the group may still have been meaningful, and I'm not trying to take that away from you. Right? Whatever magic you did, it may have been beautiful, it may have been powerful, it may have changed your life. And that's okay. It's okay for it to have been all those good things, and still for the part about it being Gardnerian to have been a lie. But don't try to insist that, no, it actually had to be Gardnerian because it was meaningful to me. It's easier said than done, but really and truly, the best thing to do is to separate your sense of magical legitimacy from a claim to being Gardnerian. Because there's lots of magic out there that's good magic, that's important magic, that's beautiful and spiritually transformative, that puts you in connection with the gods, that isn't Gardnerian. The claim to Gardnerian legitimacy is a very specific thing that relies on specific initiatory rituals performed by people who have the authority and the ability to perform them. And you can have real magic and real religion and all that juicy stuff without it having been Gardnerian, but you can't claim it was Gardnerian if it doesn't meet those criteria. So, the last thing that I want to talk about just real quick is a couple of red flags to look out for that usually indicate a coven is not legit. Number 1, if they do not know their lineage. I guarantee you, every Gardnerian initiate knows their lineage. Knows I was initiated by X, X was initiated by Y, Y was initiated by Z, and can trace that lineage all the way back to Gerald Gardner. Now, lineage is a relatively private thing. A lot of people aren't going to be willing to share their entire lineage with you. But at the very least, they can tell you how they fit into the larger family tree of Gardnerian Wicca. And this connects directly into number 2, which is that barring exceptional circumstances where like everyone who knew you has died, Gardnerian initiates can provide a vouch of other initiates in the Gardnerian community who know their initiatory status and can confirm, yes, this person is one of us. And importantly, they can provide a vouch to someone whose initiatory status does not ultimately depend on them, right? If I say to you, oh, yes, my initiate, Susie, can tell you that I'm a Gardnerian initiate, that doesn't work as a vouch because Susie's claim to being a Gardnerian depends on mine, so she can't validate that I am one. But I can refer you to other Gardnerian initiates who don't depend on me for their initiatory claims, right? I can refer you to my initiator. I can refer you, who is well known in the Gardnerian community. I can refer you to other people who have totally different lineages from me, but who know me as an initiate, who have been present in Gardnerian rituals with me, in some cases who were present at my initiation. And those people can confirm, yes, Jack is a Gardnerian initiate. So I can refer you out to someone who is themselves a verifiable Gardnerian initiate, and who can be verified as a Gardnerian initiate without you having to go through me. And then that person can say, yes, Jack is for real. If someone can't do that, that's a huge red flag. It's called vouching. It is a fundamental and essential part of how Gardnerian Wicca operates. There are occasionally, extremely rarely, like maybe once in a lifetime, there are cases where someone is a legitimate initiate, but like their initiators are dead and they didn't interact with the community and no one really knew them. And that's a terrible conversation to have, but it's incredibly rare. It's incredibly rare, and in those situations, there are other ways that they can verify that they are an initiate. There are things they know, there are things they possess that can help us to confirm that they are, in fact, an initiate. If someone hasn't heard of vouching, is unfamiliar with the concept of vouching, and is unable to provide a vouch, that's a massive red flag, and that's an indicator that they are almost certainly not Gardnerian. And vouching is also kind of closely related to lineage, because when I encounter someone else who is claiming to be a Gardnerian and we're unsure of each other, part of how we suss each other out is we sort of go, okay, like, who are you off of? I'm off of Deborah. Oh, okay, you're off of so-and-so. And we kind of go back and forth until we find names that we recognize. It's a small community. We do kind of all know each other. And if we don't all know each other, I know someone who knows and can confirm, right? So knowing your lineage and being able to provide a general picture of where you fit in the family tree, very important. Being able to provide a vouch, very important. The third red flag, if someone is using the phrase neo-Gardnerian, they are not a Gardnerian. There is no such thing as neo-Gardnerian. The phrase neo-Gardnerian is used by people who are practicing rituals that they think are Gardnerian, but who do not have Gardnerian lineage and who are not empowered to practice Gardnerian Wicca. No one in the Gardnerian community will ever describe themselves as neo-Gardnerian. just, you will not encounter it. It is very rare that I am willing to issue categorical statements about the initiatory community. That's one that I am absolutely willing to say. No legitimate Gardnerian is going to be describing themselves as neo-Gardnerian. And if you have been told that you're neo-Gardnerian, or if you've been told that you're Gardnerian, and then sort of like when pressed on it, the word neo-Gardnerian comes up, big red flag, and you should be asking other questions. And then the final thing that I will say as kind of a red flag, an indicator that a claim to Gardnerian lineage is not legitimate, is if your coven is relying on printed materials, published materials, for their supposedly initiatory rituals, whether that's the initiations themselves or whether that's the rituals that you do after initiation. If you're taking your rituals out of a book or off of a website, that ain't Gardnerian. Well, our rituals are secret, they are not published, they are private, we keep them to ourselves, and we pass them initiator to initiate. You're never going to be, like, in an initiatory context, you're not going to be referring out to a book and being like, oh, well, you know, this book from 1981 is how we're going to cast the circle. Like, no, that's not how it works. So be on the lookout for that. If your coven is relying on published printed materials as the basis for their rituals, you want to ask questions about why they haven't been passed the rituals by their upline and why they need to rely on a book that someone published. So there are other red flags, but I think those are the biggest ones that I wanted to call out. I'm going to end this video here. It is a little bit longer than I try for my videos to be. That's just because it's so hard to talk about legitimacy and authenticity and what it means to be a Gardnerian initiate in a way that isn't going to put people on the defensive. And my goal is not to do that. I hope this video was helpful to you. I will talk to you sometime soon. Have a good one.